Okay. So monopsony, and we have demand equals to 10 minus P, supply equals to 2P minus 5, and in terms of a diagram, that looks like this. Five, 2.5. Okay. Now, we need to find marginal expenditure, which is supply curve with trace the slope. So let's first draw it first. It looks like somewhere like this, right? Okay. How do we actually find this line? Now, you go through the same step. You go through the same step as in Monopoly. We haven't even introduced the minimum wage yet, so this would be relatively simple for now. So you go from find marginal expenditure. So you go from QS equals to 2P minus 5. Rearrange so you have P on the left hand side, and that would be It'd be Q plus 5 divided by 2. You double the slope of Q in this case. So marginal expenditure equals to Q plus 5 over 2, right? Okay. So you can verify that for this equation, when Q equals to 0, it does start at 2.5, right? 5 plus 5 over 2 is 2.5, and it goes up. Okay. Then you find, right, you need to equate demand to marginal expenditure. But once again, notice that demand is expressed in terms of Q equals to 10 minus P. You need it the other way around. So Q equals 10 minus P, and rearranging gives you PD equals to 10 minus Q, and then you can equate demand equals marginal expenditure, because they need to be in the same unit. Money equals money. So you can't have quantity equals money. You have to be money equals money. So in this case, we now have money versus money. 10 minus Q equals Q plus 5 over 2. So rearranging gives you Q equals to 25, right? It equals to, no, not 25. You have 15 over 4, I think, right? 2Q, 10 minus 5 over 2, that's 20 over 2 minus 5 over 2, that's 15 over 2, then you divide by 2 is 15 over 4, which would be, what would that be? 3, right? 3 what is 3 divided by 4? That's 3.875? 8.75? Okay. Alright. But you can, in the exam, you can use a calculator. So you don't need to do it by heart. So this is 3.75, and salary or wage is determined by supply curve at that point. So P equals to, you need to, so supply curve, now the supply curve, what we have here is, so what you have is here is QS. So you can, so I'll just say find price from supply curve. And that would be 3.75 equals to 2p minus 5, right? So rearranging, that gives you p equals to 8.75 divided by 2, right? That's 4.375. Okay. Okay, so so since the way I drew it slightly the diagram slightly understated where 5 is, so it should look more like this. Okay, so take a look what happens with monopsony. Monopsony, remember we do know that the competitive market equilibrium is here, right? Let's see, what color should I use? Let me use green. This is where the competitive market equilibrium is. Price equals to 5, quantity also equals to 5. That we know. So compared to the competitive market, monopsony would result in lower salary and fewer people hired, which is expected. That's the whole point. The employer is trying to save money by hiring only the cheap workers. So not surprisingly, he's reducing the number of people he's hiring in order to just focus on the cheap workers, and he's paying less to them. So that's exactly the objective. Hire fewer people, focus on the cheap people, pay them cheaply. So that's monopsony. And now we're going to think about what happens if you impose a minimum wage. Okay? Right. So monopsony. Okay, minimum wage under monopsony. So let's draw a diagram first. Did I state how much the minimum wage is in the, no? Okay, so we're just going to figure out one. All right, so let's just first draw a diagram again. All right, that's how it looks like right now. So as we already know, the minimum wage has to be higher than the monopsony market equilibrium wage to be meaningful, right? To be meaningful. So for our purpose, actually, let's just use $5 as the example. That would be coincide with the competitive market. So let's just use $5 as the example, right? So let's say minimum wage is $5. What happens? Anyone who's willing to work for $5 will get to work. So the new supply curve looks like this. So it becomes a flat line. So let's just first write that down. The new supply curve is not a straight line, so it means it would have two parts. It would have two parts. So one way is to write down it in terms of the old way we have, right? Although it's actually not a very easy, it won't be, so if usually you write QS equals to something something, right? But that would not be very easy to interpret for the flat region here, right? So if the salary is 5, what would Q be? Well, it could be 1, it could be 2, doesn't know. Well, we don't know. So in this case, it's probably easier if we just start with expressing the supply curve as a function, or so we're going to express it as price as a function of quantity, like this. Now this would make it easier. So what would be the salary necessary to hire a certain amount of workers as per worker? So this is salary per worker. As long as you're having fewer than 5 workers, we know this is 5 from previous calculation, but in case this is a new question, this is simply the number of workers willing to work at $5. Right, so just to make it very let me start with that. Number of workers willing to work for minimum wage. So let's first find that one. First find this. So what's the number of workers willing to work for minimum wage? That's given by supply curve. That equals to QS minimum wage. And in this case, that's QS $5, which is what? 2p minus 5, so 2 times 5 equals to 10 minus 5, which equals to 5, right? So 5 workers. And then we're going to express the supply curve this way. First, we know that if you hire fewer than 5 workers, you can always pay the minimum wage, which is $5, right? So this we know. So as long as Q is smaller or equal to 5, then it's possible to hire them at $5 each. But what if you have more? Now, if you have more, then you're just paying them what the original supply curves say you should be paying them, right? Which is 2p minus 5. So that's the new supply curve. It has 2 parts. One which state what happens when you hire only the minimum wage workers, and the other part tells you what happens when you hire workers other than those who are willing to accept minimum wage. And then now we need to find the marginal expenditure. So let's take a look at how the marginal expenditure looks like. The marginal expenditure, as I already explained, if you're only hiring minimum wage workers, each of them costs you $30. You're not paying anyone extra by hiring more. So it's a horizontal line. But once you decide you want to hire more than minimum wage workers, you have to give everyone, including the minimum wage workers, a pay raise. And that would result in a jump in cost. expressed in this new marginal expenditure curve. Once again, this is a line with two parts. Well, technically three parts, but the middle part this is more like this is really the same, this is just a brick, so we don't need to express it. New marginal expenditure. What do we do here? So you have to double the slope for the part that is diagonal. Okay? You have to double the slope for the part that is diagonal. What about the part that is not diagonal? Well, as you can see from the diagram, the red line is exactly the same as the blue line, so this part is exactly the same. Right? Remember, marginal expenditure tells you how much more money you're paying to hire one more worker. And in the minimum wage case, each additional worker costs you minimum wage. So that's exactly what's happening now. And the other part, you have to double the slope. So that would be, we have already calculated, this shouldn't be 2p minus 5. This is incorrect. We calculated just now, it doesn't make sense, right? P equals to P. So it's what? 2p minus 5 rearrange is Q minus what? Q plus 5 over 2. Sorry. Yep. And this, in this case, marginal expenditure is just go back to Q plus 5 over 2. So the previous case is bracket Q plus 5, close bracket divided by 2. In the marginal expenditure, it's Q plus 5 over 2. Okay, now we have the marginal expenditure. Now it's a matter of finding the intersection between demand and so now it's this one. In our case, it's actually relatively easy because you can see, as you can see where the intersection is. So it's pretty clear that if you pay $5, then you would have exactly five workers. So generally speaking, what you need to do is you have to compare both cases. If you don't have a diagram to assist you, you would have to compare both cases. And you should be able to reject at least one of them. One of them would not make sense. So let's see. Right. So, case Q small equals to 5. So we need to consider two cases. The first case is what if Q is smaller than 5, then you have demand being 10 minus Q, right? 10 minus Q equal to 5, Q equals to 5. Which is okay, right? That's okay. This is fine. But what about the other case? You have to check the other case. Case Q bigger than 5, you have 10 minus Q equals to Q plus 5 over 2. What do you get in this case? You get Q equals to, what, 3.75, right? Well, this would not be okay, because we assume that Q is bigger than 5, and you arrive in the conclusion that Q has to be smaller than 5. So this would be a contradiction. And in mathematics, when you have a contradiction, you have to reject it. It's not valid. So this is the general way you have to deal with the monopsony case. Check both cases. Right? Check both cases. You should be able to reject at least one of them. You should be able to. Yep.
Why did you use 10 minus q on the top one when you just do 5 equals 5?
Which one?
For that right there.
This one?
Yeah.
So this is the demand, right? So this is this line,
Right.
and 5 is this line, the blue line. The red line. So you're checking whether at $5 whether you can actually hire 5 or few workers, and you can, because there are enough people willing to work for that price. But if you have Q bigger than 5, so this is this part now, this part, and you see that for this line, this red line, to intersect with the demand curve, it actually has to be here, which is below 5, which would be a contradiction. We have assumed that it's bigger than 5. So you have to check both cases. You have to check both cases. You should be able to reject at least one. Yep. Now sometimes, as we have in the previous diagram, right, the line would actually be, so this is actually done, right? This is basically pretty much done. Well, let's just finish this first, and before I actually talk about what happens if the line cross in between. Price would be given by, once again, price given by supply curve. $3.75 is below 5, so this is 5. All right, so this is completed. This is a complete solution. First, you have to find how many workers would be willing to work for minimum wage. Then you construct the new supply curve, which is a piecewise linear line. You have one part that is flat and one part that is diagonal, right? And the part that is flat are the workers who are willing to work for minimum wage, and the other part is just everyone else, and you have the original supply curve. Then you double the slope. You double the slope whenever you see Q. That gives you marginal expenditure. And finally, you equate price to marginal expenditure. You equate demand to marginal expenditure. But you have to check both cases, because you now have two cases. You check both cases, you should be able to reject at least one of them. And the case you keep would be your solution, and then you figure out what the salary would be by substituting the quantity back into the supply curve. What would happen? What would happen if you have the line such that it's actually not touching the flat part like this? Let's say you have, once again, 10, 10, right? And then this would be 5, this would be 2.5. You have supply curve. And now let's say the minimum wage is actually something more like $4.50, okay? Somewhere here. And then you would have the marginal expenditure just like the one we have in our previous diagram, more like this. Now what? Now in this situation, notice that if you ask, okay, so how many workers are willing to work for $4.50? In other words, how many workers are willing to work for minimum wage? How many? So well, we know that's 2 times 4.5 minus 5, that's 4. Okay. If you only pay $4.5, you would have 4 workers willing to work for that salary. Okay, 4. So what happens? What happens with the marginal expenditure? So now, supply curve, just very quickly, since I'm going through this exact same step as before. You have to pay $4.5 if you only hire 4 or fewer workers. You have to pay the original salary per worker if you hire more than 4. Marginal expenditure would be 4.5 if you only hire 4 or below, but Q plus 5 over 2 if you hire more than 4. Now, if you check the conditions again, like what we did just now, right? 10 minus Q equals to 4.5. Q equals to 5.5, which is bigger than 4, right? So this is actually not okay. And if you check the other case too, Q is bigger than, if you assume you are going to hire more than 4 people, Q bigger than 4, then 10 minus Q equals to Q plus 5 over 2. You have Q equals 3.75, which is smaller than 4. So when the demand curve crosses between the two segments of the marginal expenditure, when that happens, you would be rejecting both cases. Right? You will be rejecting both cases. Once again, this is reflecting the conflicting incentive of the monopsony in this case. Well, you can only pay $4 per worker if you hire fewer than 4 workers. But when the salary is $4, the monopsony wants to hire more than 4 workers. It's so cheap, he wants to hire more. Unfortunately, if you want to hire more than 4 workers, you have to pay more than $4. Have to pay more than $4.50. Okay, so what about if he hire more than 4 workers? Would he be willing to pay the price suggested by the situation we have here, which is a lot more? And the answer is no. If he's going to hire more than 4 workers, he's actually not willing to pay the cost of the salary raise. So he wants to hire more workers at $4. He's not willing to pay a salary raise for everyone in order to hire more. So the only conclusion is he's going to stick with 4. So he wants to hire more than 4. But want is different from what you can do. So in this case, what he can actually do is still hiring 4. He's not satisfied, but that's the best he can do. So when you have the demand curve going through the vertical segment here, the employer wants to hire more at minimum wage, but he is unable to, so he's just going to hire as many as he can find, which is 4, right? So when you reject both cases, then you simply go for the answer is simply going to be the employer is going to hire all minimum wage workers. And that's the answer. Right? So at minimum wage.